Hello, everybody. Welcome. So my name's Katie Roche, and I'm the development director at the Englert Theater, which produces, along with Little Village Magazine, this festival you're at, which is Witching Hour. How many of you are here at this event but haven't been participating in the rest of the festival? I'm just really curious. Well, you should know that one of the reasons that you're here is because the library is an amazing partner to our whole community, but an incredible partner to the Englert Theater and our festival. So a big thank you to the library for being our host today. I do have some other sponsors to thank, but since so many of you are engaging with the festival for the first time here right now, I just want to tell you just a little bit about the festival. So it started yesterday, it'll end late tonight. This is a festival dedicated to exploring the unknown, discussing creative process, and presenting new work. So some of the experiences that I had right off the bat yesterday was a completely raw moment with an artist who had just returned from engaging with a piece that's still in process. It was emotional. I don't think she knows or we know what it's going to be, but she just completely exposed that process to us. It was really incredibly cool. Earlier today, I got to hear a new set of poetry that hadn't been delivered to the public in any way, shape, or form. So eventually, when that's published, we have this moment of getting to see how it changed. How did presenting and performing that poetry at this festival affect the way that work came together? We have some other sponsors to thank. The University of Iowa Libraries and Digital Scholarship and Publishing Studios, University of Iowa School of Music, Midwest Ticks, Velvet Coat and Revival, Merge, which a lot of events are taking place over there, and the Iowa City Area Development Group, the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies, Feed Me Weird Things, which is a really amazing new music series here in Iowa City. And we have grant support from the Iowa City Coralville Area Convention and Visitors Bureau and the Iowa City Downtown District. Iowa Shrimp Farms is one of our sponsors. That's a real thing. We don't just throw that in there to see if you're listening. They will be harvesting some of their first shrimp very soon, so it's kind of exciting. If you want to hear about that, you can always just ask me and I'll tell you more. Scope, Adamantine Spine Moving, Reunion Brewery is our beer sponsor, Iowa Public Radio, you probably heard us on there nonstop. They're really amazing partners, Film Scene, and the Tuesday Agency. So there are still quite a few pieces of programming that have single tickets available to them through the rest of the day. So if you get one of these beautiful programs and you decide you want to see something, the Englert box office is open, and we're happy to get a ticket in your hand. And I'm just really honored to be able to introduce this event today. Like all of you, I am a major fan. I kind of came late to Welcome to Night Vale and then listened to it nonstop to the point that my husband was like, what is this? What are you listening to? Because I pretty much only listen to NPR, so suddenly, there was weird things happening in City Hall and at the City Council, and he's like, is this local news? What is this? Which, who knows, there's an election coming up. Everything could change. We don't know. So it is my absolute honor to welcome Mr. Joseph Fink, Jeffrey Cranor, and Sean Lewis.
Hey everybody, how you doing? First of all, it seems we have a bigger turnout than Chicago last night, so give yourself a round of applause.
Yeah.
Iowa City.
Thanks, Iowa City.
I want to start off, we were talking, I was basically wasting all of my questions out in the lobby because I had so many for these guys. But one hit me really hard as I started asking about how they record the show, like how elaborate of a studio do you need? Like exactly how are you doing this while you're on the road? And the response, I'll let you guys take it away. How do you record this podcast?
Sure. Welcome to Night Vale from the very start has been recorded on a little cheap USB microphone in Cecil Baldwin's apartment. It used to be an apartment in Harlem, and he would have to wait for the kids to stop playing outside so he could record. So the recording schedule was kind of set by how loud the street was. Now he records in Brooklyn, and then it's edited with free audio editing software. I'm a big proponent of not needing studio or fancy equipment to do a podcast. The stuff is compressed down so much anyway that honestly, any audio quality. We've had people who work in radio who don't realize we don't use a studio, and I'm sure they really think they can hear the difference, but they can't because they think we record in a studio. The truth is, once you compress that down, it kind of sounds the same.
Yeah, once it's on an MP3, and then you're people mostly listening to podcasts in their car or terrible computer speakers or in earbuds or something, you just lose a lot of the. You lose a lot of. I mean, you still have to know what sounds fine. You can definitely hear when somebody sounds like they've recorded, in the middle of a highway or something. That I'm like, you should close your window when you do that, but.
Because I myself thought this must be like a really elaborate setup studio, and then you showed me a picture of your basement with a keyboard.
Well, so I have another podcast called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats that I record with a musician named John Darnielle. Yeah, and oh, awesome. I am also hardcore, but not that hardcore. So I flew down to John's house to record with him, and we ended up having to record in his basement because it was the only place we could get internet, weirdly. And so we were just sitting in his basement, and then we had like a couple mics, and I only had like a pop shield for one of them, and he was like, "Oh, I don't actually own any pop filters because I hate them, but here, this works just as well." And then he went over to his laundry and grabbed a sock and just stuck it over the mic. So our like very professional recording setup was the two of us sitting cross-legged on a very old mattress with like a sock just hanging off his microphone.
I've used that recently, and it works excellent. And I'm worried about why I ever spent $30 on a pop guard in my whole life when, a sock is amazing.
I just love anybody with a big broadcasting aspiration who's like, I've been spending all day at KRUI trying to figure out how to use this studio, and they're like, then these guys came in and they were like, use a sock.
Put a sock on a $60 mic you can get at Best Buy. Yeah.
And so I came to your guys' work through Alice Isn't Dead. I travel around the country for like comic book signings and for theater jobs, and I don't like to fly. It freaks me out heavily. So I drive everywhere, so I have to download what I'm going to listen to for about 16 or 17 hours at a time. And someone had mentioned to me, you should listen to Alice Isn't Dead. I put it on, and I eventually came to Night Vale through that because I got super fascinated with like how well you can hit the surreal qualities of this country. Like doing 16-hour drives, if anybody in this room has done that, is really surreal. Like people are nodding. I like how fast they are. Like people are like, yes, just did it. Like been following them cross country, very crazy. You start to really get almost delusional. So suddenly listening to Alice on this loop, I remember listening to the episode and she's like, she's left the town and she drives in a circle and then she's like, I'm back in the same town. And I'm just like, oh my God, am I in the same town? And so I'm kind of fascinated by that, how you're able to do that in Night Vale and in Alice Isn't Dead. Like, I think the writing of it is so amazing because you're very detailed and specific in this really large world, but then there's certain things that you don't give details on that I start to fill in the blanks. Like, as much as I've been listening to Night Vale, I don't know that you ever name an exact place it happens, yet I would swear I'm in Texas or New Mexico at all times, in like specific areas of it. And I just kind of, like, is that conscious? Or when you're going about that quality, how is that kind of created?
I mean, I think the beautiful thing about a non-visual storytelling platform, just like this medium, right, is there's no visual there. So whatever you don't say, that's going to have, those blanks will have to be filled in by the listener. And you can do a lot of really amazing suggestion to people. And I think the root of a lot of great comedy and a lot of great horror is in the details that are left out, the implication of what is going on. And I don't know if it was Stephen King who said it, but it was talking about, like, you know, a spider is scary, but what's scarier is when you turn your head and look back and the spider is no longer there, because then the implication is now it could be anywhere, as the infinite possibilities of it. And I think that's
like literally every day when you live in the country.
yes, yes.
That's my office.
Yes, you learn to name the spiders so they become less scary. But yeah, and I think about, like, when I remember, like, when I was a kid, and I remember when The Simpsons started, and it's one of the early seasons of The Simpsons, and it has one of my all-time favorite jokes that is structured to be where the joke is the missing data. And it was a moment where Bart turns on the television and it's Kent Brockman. And then right as Bart turns on the television, Kent Brockman just says, the newscaster just says, thus leaving the vice president in charge. And now sports. And I just think it's one of the best jokes ever, because it's the details that it leaves out that just leaves your mind to go in all kinds of different directions. And I think with the show, like with Allison, with Welcome to Night Vale and The Wires, these are things that Joseph and I have always been interested in. You start setting up a suggestion of something, a slight description, but then you don't quite give everything. You suggest that there's a faceless old woman, which is sort of scarier than a woman with a scary face. And you suggest that there's somebody in the background behind you in a mirror, but it's just out of your sight. All it is a glint of something, so you don't really have a specific form that's standing behind you, and that seems like really part of what horror is.
It just seems so brilliant to me, honestly, in the sense of how active it makes me as a listener. You know, like I'm used to I listen to a lot of podcasts, mainly because of these drives, and there's a lot of times where I get to be really passive. Like, it's a full story given to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's when that girl didn't date him, and he, like, cried. I listen to really good podcasts, clearly. Versus when I'm listening to this, and I'm having to kind of lean in and fill in these kind of holes that I think really interesting. I think at the same time, though, which seems really deft as well, is there's this world, in Night Vale especially, which I've been kind of feverishly catching up on, that's really huge, and where everything's, I mean, you guys all know it, so pardon me for reiterating it for you. But I love how big the world is in terms of, like, everyone accepting these conspiracies, and it's like there's centipedes, there's noises, there's lights, there's helicopters, and yet an entire episode about, like, a first date between these two men is actually the most interesting part of the episode. Do you know what I mean? Like, in this world where everything is possible and exploding, I love that it's still human connection that ends up being like, oh, this is where the actual, like, mystery and joy and excitement of this episode is in. I was just wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is no storytelling without human characters, and by that I don't mean necessarily human characters, but you know, if you're writing about two anthropomorphic dogs or whatever, like, ultimately you still need to have a feeling that they are basically human.
This has immediately become my favorite interview ever.
Yeah, so, like, with Night Vale, you know, we get asked, I think, a lot, how do you provide stakes or provide any sort of way in for the listener or the reader, because it's such a bizarre world in which things are constantly shifting. And the answer is you put human beings in it, and you have to make sure that they are actually human beings, that they have a consistent sense of self, that they have things they want and things they're afraid of and things they worry about and things they like. And if you do that, it doesn't really matter how weird the world is in. If they're in it, it feels real because they are in it and they are reacting to it.
That makes incredible sense. I just remember being kind of moved while I was listening to it, and I was like, I'm not expecting that from this. But it is really lovely anyway. And we should talk, obviously, about It Devours, which everyone here, I'm sure, is going to buy. People are clutching it. That's good. Yeah, waving it, clutching it, sort of holding it up. Now, obviously, there's a big balance between science and faith within this. I'm sure there's a lot of different directions this can go. Obviously, through a little bit of internet sleuthing, I was able to find out small details about both of you. I apologize.
No worries.
So you were a religious studies major in college?
Yeah, I mean, religion has always been important to me. I was raised religiously Jewish. I went to synagogue at least once a week. We did Shabbat dinners in the home. My mom would bake a challah every week. Religion was always very important to me. But also my mom was a math professor. She gave me Richard Feynman books to read when I was a teenager as like, here, read these. She took me to astronomy conventions. And so both religion and science have been a very integral part of my life from very early on.
Did she have tension between the two?
No, she was the more religious of the two. My dad was raised Jewish. She converted, and converts are always more religious. So she was the one. Judaism. I'm going to just speak for Judaism now, even though no one person has any right to speak for any group. But Judaism is not a religion about belief. It's about a religion about action. Belief is kind of irrelevant to. It's a series. Judaism is a series of things you do, and so it doesn't really matter what you're thinking while you do them, which is, I think, a very good value, because I think in the world it doesn't matter what your intentions are. It matters what you do. What you meant to do is irrelevant. You are the person at the end of your life. The list of things that you did, that's who you were, and so it's not a praying and being someone who understands how science works. Those are not in conflict. They can just be an intersection. They are just two different modes of thought.
And Jeff, you grew up in a more like Baptist household.
Yeah. I grew up in Texas, going to the Baptist church, much more fundamentalist kind of background. It was always really, it was interesting because as I got older, I definitely pushed myself out of the church, just because I think I sort of started. I went to college and started meeting more people than were just in my church and my family, and realized like, oh, this is a pretty amazing and diverse world that this religion definitely does not like a large percentage of. But it's interesting because there's so much of the teachings of the Christian church that I find really, really lovely and valuable, and so I've always held on to those ideas, and I do think that there is while my church definitely focused on the salvation of the individual, I think that so much of what I really latched onto was like the goodness to people and the socialism, and it was really great. I really always loved like the spirit of taking care of those who cannot take care of themselves or are less able to, and so I think there's, but also just the idea of if you even go back to like looking at the Old Testament, I've always loved the story of creation. I've always loved the idea that, I just think that's a really beautiful story, that something was crafted out of nothing, that something just one day just began, which is like a mind-numbing thing. It's really hard to process, and it's something that we really don't have any explanation for, of like, well, what was there before there was something. And so as a kid, I was always really taken by that too.
Well, it's also interesting, I think, because I think as artists, like, probably not as thoughtfully, like, thinking like, oh, I'm creating because I'm attracted to these older stories. But I know for myself, when I'm making things, there's a lot of times there's like plays specifically when I'm writing them, or comics. A lot of times I'm coming from, I actually don't have an answer on this, and I'm exploring it for myself just in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Is there some of that when you guys are like, it's fascinating to me that you write it together. So how does it start? Is it you guys having conversations about science and faith, and then characters evolve out of that, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, so we have a writing we've been writing together for 7 years now. We have a writing process that we follow for everything we do, and it does start with conversations. We talk through, especially with something like a novel, where with a podcast we can kind of play it a little more by ear and just try things out and see where it leads. With a novel, you have to have all the things land and mean something and end somewhere. And so, we talked through the whole plot and figured that all out. Oftentimes, Night Vale stuff, especially our live shows or our books, they start with, and I don't know another word to use for it except for we figure out what the game of the thing is. So for instance, we did a live show called Ghost Stories. And in Ghost Stories, the game was we wanted to see how long we could have Cecil stand in silence in front of an audience and have them be with him and there and sit through the silence with him. And that was the game of that show, was to write a thing that took people through a process to the point where they would sit there for 40 seconds in dead silence while he looked back at them. With this novel, like the game,
it was
worked.
really intense. Yeah.
We did it. We did it. However,
I think 47 was the.
no. How many times did we do that show?
60 something, 70.
I think at least 70 something. Not once did anyone shout out during that silence. No one once interrupted that silence. By the time we got them to that point, by the time we took them through that, every single audience, all around the world that we did that respected it. With this book, the game we started out with is we wanted. The first novel, we realized we could write a novel in this world. That was sort of the challenge. With this one, we wanted to write a thriller. We wanted to write a page-turner thing. And so that was sort of the goal, was can we write in a world this weird a page-turning thriller?
Gotcha.
And then at the same time, in terms of content, we knew we wanted to address kind of how science and religion interact with each other.
I'm fascinated by this idea of game. One, because it makes me jealous, and anyone who has like a regular day job is like, your job is like a game. Like, I love the experimentation and the level of freedom. Like, because to play a game means there also has to be a level of acceptance that it might fail.
Yeah.
I mean, is that part of it when you're going in? Is like, this might go really bad. Like,
Yeah, and I think for something like something like a novel, you want to be, you that game is kind of played out a little before it's published, right? Like you definitely want to talk with people, because once it's published, there's no transforming it, right? Like if there's a typo in that book in the second printing, you can fix that or something.
Right.
But but for something like a live show that can be a living, breathing thing, you can constantly tweak it and play with it. And the amount of, say for Ghost Stories, the amount of silence that we had really varied on whatever Cecil thought he could get away with. And so some audiences, that silence was like 22 seconds long, which is still, if you've ever...
it's a long time.
On a stage.
If you've
that's
ever been on
really long
stage, I
time.
mean, there's a reason like why radio stations, you don't want any 7 seconds of silence and an alarm goes off in a studio, because 7 seconds of silence is a long time. And so when you get that, but there was always that little gear there, and there was also a thing of like, I think Cecil built in his own like fail safes of like, if somebody were to do something, we talked briefly before about it, and he was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna have to figure out how to like cut it off without, to move on, but I'm going to have to figure out if I'm going to need to acknowledge it or if I'm going to need to ignore it. And it kind of depends on what it is. And you kind of only know that when it happens.
Yeah.
I do remember one place we were at, somebody sneezed during it, but nobody like laughed during. Because sometimes during if you've been in a movie or something and there's like a really dramatic, scary moment in a horror film, and then somebody in the audience just, it causes like a laughter. It causes like a tittering in the audience. And during that sneeze, like nobody laughed. Like it was a thing of like, wait, we're all in this moment. I'm not gonna acknowledge
No,
this.
it's interesting. Like the audience themselves did not want to break the tension.
Yeah.
Because like in the horror movie, that's the tension's built up. You're waiting for the jump scare and someone sneezes, and you're like, oh, thank God, I'm still in the real world.
Yeah.
And that was sort of our job, because you take an audience fresh, doesn't matter how polite they are. If you give them a 40-second silence, they're going to want to fill it with something. Even if they're polite, they'll start laughing just because of the absurdity of having to sit through a silence that long. So the job was we just introduced silence very early on, and the first silence was like a second long, and then we just gradually made it longer and longer and provided more explanation for what that silence was until we hit that final silence, and we explained exactly what that silence was. And then at that point, they had learned how to, as an audience, deal with the fact that nothing was going to be said for a while.
That's interesting. Like
Yeah.
they kind of helped create the medium with you of the silence.
That's the whole thing with live shows, is a live show that is like, hey, audience, we're going to talk at you for a while, never works. You need to be able to be aware of the audience's energy and work with it. So like all of our live scripts, you have to be super aware of where is the audience's energy and where do I want to take it next.
Did you know you wanted to do live shows from the get-go with Night Vale, or was that something that happened organically?
Pretty early on, we actually were doing some readings in like back rooms of bars in the East Village. Kind of before we started Night Vale, Joseph had been working on this Commonplace Books, which is like an independent self-publishing thing, and so I'd been helping him out with that, and we were soliciting writers from friends and the internet and things like that, and writing around certain topics. And so when Joseph would get the books published, we would have like a book release party, and we would have any of the authors that were in town come read. And then we had started Night Vale in June of 2012, and I think we were only like a couple months in, and we did one of these events at the now defunct Bar 82 on Second Avenue, and
R.I.P. Bar 82.
R.I.P. Bar
Sadness that came
82.
from the left.
I think that space has still never been filled with anything. It's just been an empty storefront for like 3 years, 4
Man, it
years.
was the best for an artist because they wouldn't charge you anything. Well, this is why they're out of business. They wouldn't charge you anything to use their back bar, which was a nice like little 50-seat venue, and you'd have like a, some crappy lights and a little stage and a microphone.
I think they'd even provide a sound guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
And
great.
they were like, just give them a tip. And anyways, but we would do these things, and I remember it would be like 20 people, and it would be friends of ours and friends of the people reading. And I remember early on we were having Cecil read scripts that had been recorded for the podcast, and then we did another similar event at another small bar in the East Village, and then on our 1 year anniversary, we did our 1 year later episode, which became episode 25, but we did that at this bar at Webster Hall in New York City, and and then suddenly we had like 115 people come, and we didn't know most of them, and it was really strange because it was the moment we realized, oh, there's people that we don't know that are listening to this show, and they actually have faces and bodies, and they show up for things, and at that point we knew we could put this in front of people and do that, and it was just a matter of finding the space.
I'm
and
fascinated
time.
by this Webster Hall moment. So, like, when you started it, I mean, obviously, this has become a big thing. Like, I do a lot of theater in town. This is more people than come to see a play in town, So I'm like, wow. Like, at any like, was there ever a point early on where what it's become was that ever the goal, or was it even plausible, or was it a complete shock, or was it something that you were like, yeah, I think this will be pretty big?
No, we didn't have a goal when we started Night Vale. Our entire goal was we like podcasts. We should make a podcast. Don't want it to sound like what other people are doing because they already do it better than us. And so, I just put together as a test that pilot episode and then brought it to Jeffrey, and we just started, if you're an artist, you just need to have projects. I had just finished, we had just finished a play we had done together. And so like I needed another project. I started working on this thing. And the goal was just to kind of create a thing that we would want to listen to ourselves. I think our big goal was to have 100,000 downloads by the end of year one, which we managed to do, and that felt like that night where we had 115 people at that bar really felt like, wow, this is the top of the mountain. Like,
Oh, yeah.
we've really done it.
Yeah.
And then literally it was like 2 weeks later that everything else happened.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Everything else happened.
Tumblr found us, and like we had 150,000 downloads the first year, and then that was June of 2013 was our 1 year anniversary. July of 2013, just within that month, we had 2.5 million downloads, and then August of 2013, and just in that month, we had 8.5 million downloads.
And this is just from people sharing it on Tumblr.
Yeah,
talking about it.
I honestly didn't know what Tumblr was.
I don't fully.
And so people are like, how do you get a thing popular on there? And I'm like, I don't know.
I don't know.
I love that they're asking me for advice. I'm like, I'm
Genuinely have no idea.
And then that just kind of accelerated everything in terms of like doing the live shows and going out on the road.
Well, it became a thing where suddenly, with that popularity and just general people knowing who we were, we became the classic popular internet thing, and so we definitely had a lot of people reaching out to us, whether it's like publishers or just getting email like, I work at a production place in Hollywood or whatever, and you start getting like little emails and things and people reaching out to you to do whatever, we sort of focused on the things that we wanted to do and knew how to do, which was writing fiction and doing theater. And so we immediately started putting together the pitch for our first novel, and started pitching it to publishers. And then we also that same year we started doing live shows. So we did a live show in Brooklyn at a really cool venue called Roulette. And then Joseph and Cecil and then Meg, who does the credits for the show, we're all out in San Francisco. She does the credits for at the end of Night Vale, and she's also our MC for our touring live show. The three of them were all out in San Francisco for a neo-futurist thing, and they were just like, well, we have enough people to like put on a live show. And so like within a week, Joseph wrote the script for a show we did called Condos.
Yeah, I mean, it was literally a thing I just put on Twitter, like, hey, we're going to be in San Francisco. Does anyone know where we could do a live show? And then our friend Lauren O'Neill, who works at or worked at the Booksmith bookstore there, was like, yeah, you can do it in my bookstore. And yeah, we did. It was like 300 people in this bookstore in the Haight in San Francisco.
That's a happy bookseller.
Oh, it was great. She ended up going on tour with us as our merch manager. She's a really awesome person. That's what you get for offering your space out of the blue to an artist.
Yeah, and so and from that moment, and then we just started like calling theaters and planning and booking our own tours. Eventually, we got a booking agent, and that has made our life way easier.
That was thank John Darnielle, who I'm doing the show with now. As soon as we started touring, he emailed me being like, "You guys need a booking agent. Please talk to mine."
Oh my God!
I can say from touring theater and booking it myself that whole entire time until probably the past year, it's painful.
We definitely had our moments in our first 2 tours when we booked it all ourselves. And some of it was great. Like you managed to we would get these like really beautiful performing arts centers. I remember the Tempe Arts Center was really nice, and but and so you get some cool spaces, the Neptune in Seattle, stuff like that. These were all really great, but we had a couple of venues. Like we definitely ended up in some like rock venues, like this one in Houston, Warehouse Live was one of the most disastrous things. Like we got there, and our setup, by the way, for our live shows, we need a mic center stage. We need a second mic for the musician that's performing the weather, and we need a DI input for the computer that was playing the music. At the time, we didn't have live music with John Bernstein, and that was really it. And Joseph showed up and asked the guy if it was set up, and the guy's like, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." We're like, "I think we sent you a writer." He's like, "I didn't read it."
No, what he said was, "Oh, I don't read those. What do you want?" I'm like, "Okay, well, I wanted what was in my writing."
Yeah. And there's a venue in Dallas where just all throughout the show, the lighting guy was positioned in the audience, which is usually where you put the lighting board when you're doing tech rehearsal. But maybe they just left it there, and he was in the middle of the audience, and then he started changing the lights during the show.
Just constantly.
And then fans
light
and people
changes.
started leaning over and just talking to him throughout the show and telling him to change lights. So he was just like taking
audience members?
he was taking requests from the audience.
He was
to
taking
change
lighting
the lights
requests.
up and down.
Just like Cecil was
During the
talking,
show.
and there's just like,
I love that it turns into like Total Request Live.
and that's when we added to our tech writer. Once the show starts, don't touch the lights.
I also kind of think it's amazing there was audience members who were like, I think you need some green.
And that was the one where, we have, especially then, we had a fairly young audience. And it's just also our audience aren't really drinkers. We learned that pretty quickly doing live shows. And we warned the Dallas venue. We're like, they're not going to buy anything. Just understand that. He's like, it'll be fine. We get a lot of money from the bar. And we're like, we promise you won't. And then afterwards, we were talking to them because they did such a bad job. And Jeffrey went to talk to him. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. We didn't make much from the bar. And Jeffrey's like, yeah, but you do. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. We didn't make much from the bar. And then just kind of wandered off.
The joys of the road.
Yep.
And how did you guys meet?
Through so I mentioned the Neo-Futurists, and Cecil and I were both members of a theater company, the New York Neo-Futurists. They're also in Chicago and in San Francisco. And so when Joseph moved to New York in 2008, I met Joseph in 2009 when he did Neo-Futurist workshops and things like that, and he came to see the Neo-Futurist show, which used to be called Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind, now called Infinite Wrench, and it is. So Joseph, it's an ongoing, ever-changing show. It's always kind of like we're writing short plays and we're writing new ones every single week. So the show's different every single weekend. And but Joseph would come pretty often. He volunteered for us and did workshops and things. And so I got to know his writing through that. And then we would hang out and talk about the plays and things like that. And then eventually I was like, well, let's write something together. This would seem fun. Yeah,
I've tried to write things with my wife, and I'm like, it's never been fun. So I'm like, I think it's interesting that you guys are like, this should be amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I was in like high school, I never felt like I would ever be any good at collaboration. I really preferred, and I think that came out of just I was never good at group school projects. I hated them. I just let me go off and do my own thing.
So many people are like, you're so right.
But it was really easy to collaborate with Jeffrey. I mean, a lot of it is I think I just had to. A lot of it was growth in myself. I had to learn what collaboration is for, because a collaboration is not for someone to do the same work that you would do, in the exact same way you would. That's not collaboration. Collaboration is when someone comes up with an idea that is something you would never think of doing, and at first are kind of like, oh, I don't know, that just doesn't seem right, but that's them bringing something that you can't. And when you really start to become receptive to that and be like, this is an idea I never would have thought of myself, and instead of getting upset about that, when you choose to get excited about that, that's when it really becomes cool. Like that's why we are, I think, very unusual directors in that we make the conscious choice to not really direct at all. We give the audience we give the actors the scripts. There's sometimes some stage directions if there's something we feel is really important. A lot of times the text also is written in a way to try and guide them towards something, but we give them no direction. We basically tell them, hey, make a choice. We trust you. And
That must terrify them.
yeah, I've talked to actors, actually. I've been like, hey, do you like this? Do you want? And some of them, I think, are into it and some of them aren't. But I think the key there is a lot of times they'll make a choice that is not what I was thinking at all when I wrote it. But again, the key there is to be like, cool, I gave them the freedom to make a choice. They did. So now when I write that character, I'm going to be writing based on that choice they made with their acting. If you've made a decision to make that character really sarcastic.
That's now funneled into the writing.
That now that character's sarcastic. I gave you that freedom to play it that way.
Have you ever had to re-record? I mean, for choices, not for general audio.
No, the only times I've ever had to record Cecil were just because he got a line wrong in a way that changed the story. And that's like literally like 3 times in 116 episodes. It's just like, it changed the meaning enough that I had him re-record.
So then in the writing back and forth, is it like one of you takes a full pass of the radio show and then sends it back? Or are you writing it together from the get-go at like for some reason I imagine you had a kitchen table?
Yeah. It's the way we write, if you've seen the movie Ghost, and
It's with pottery?
like the pottery, but with a laptop. The thing is,
Which one is Swayze?
we alternate.
You alter.
Even number, odd number, yeah. But with the podcast episode is about 2,500 words, and so with the podcast episode, it's a pretty easy for one person to write and process and kind of self-edit and then pass it on to the next person to then do an editing pass. And so if I write an episode, I'll write it top to bottom, and then I'll send it on to Joseph being like, this is ready for you, and then he'll do a pass. And it may include like, this looks great, I added a couple of jokes, make sure you like it, and then we'll sign off and send it to Cecil. Or it might be like, I think I see what you're doing, but this was unclear, this paragraph I highlighted here. I think this conflicts with what you were saying over here or what happened in a previous episode. Do you want to try and rewrite that, or you want me to take a hack at it? Something like that. So they may be more involved. We've had some that have to go back and forth a couple times. And then we've had others that are just, looks great. I've fixed some punctuation. Now we're good. And with and obviously with the live show, and with the novel, there's a larger, the live shows get to be about 4,700 to 6,000 words, depending on how many guests we have in the show. And so those are ones where we'll kind of sit down and kind of walk through it with each other. We'll talk through the outline of it. And I'll be like, okay, well, I'll write the community calendar, and then here's the outline of the main plot. And then you can write the Michelle Wynn part, and then I'll write this other thing. And so, and then the novel, we have to write Joseph mentioned earlier, full outline, and then we can break up the chapters.
Well, it brings us back to the novel. We should probably, I think, do a reading
Oh, sure.
from the book. I think they'd enjoy that.
Hi, everyone. It's my turn to read. Because Jeffrey read last night. Today, I'm the Swayze. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 3. It's always an interesting thing to choose what to read, especially with this one because it's a fairly plot-heavy novel. But this one, I think, it only mentions who the murderer is like 2 or 3 times, so it should be fun. Nilanjana had no interest in Carlos. And anyway, he was married to the local community radio host, Cecil Palmer. Still, she couldn't not notice that he was, in his way, stunningly handsome. Even his frown was perfect, and he ran his hands perfectly through his perfect hair. In science, of course, there's always a lot of pressure to look good. Appearances are a major part of a science career, and top scientists face all sorts of accusations of plastic surgery and unhealthy diets, a constant scrutiny in gossip magazines and tabloid blogs. But Carlos stayed out of all of that. He was a beautiful person, but that never interested him much. He only cared about 2 things, his scientific work and his family. Nilanjana didn't know Carlos's family well. She knew his teenage niece, Janice, was born with spina bifida, and while her frequent checkups of eyes, kidneys, and spine came back healthy each time, Carlos would take days off work to be with her and his brother and sister-in-law. Nilanjana knew that his husband Cecil sometimes faced serious dangers as a reporter in a town as full of terrible secrets as Night Vale, and those dangers sent Carlos into a worried stupor. He would pace about the office, trying not to call the station to ask if Cecil was okay. Not much got done in the lab when Carlos fretted for Cecil's safety. She could tell when Carlos had a date night planned because he put gel in his hair and wore his most striking lab coat. She was uncertain why Carlos wanted to talk to her now. She hoped that the problem was with his scientific work. She didn't have much to say on the subject of being in love. Not that she hadn't had boyfriends. She was a human being of adult age with an interest in other human beings, and she had been in relationships starting from high school, but she did not feel qualified to offer advice on the subject. She was just stumbling along, the same as anyone. It was occasionally fun and often lonely, whether she was with someone at the time or not. Carlos interrupted this reverie by pulling down a chart that said in large letters, "Science." Today's topic of discussion is science. I've provided a visual aid. Oh, thank God. He gestured for her to sit, but she didn't like sitting much, and so she gestured that she would rather stand, and then there was some gesturing back and forth that neither of them understood. Finally, Carlos sat, and she remained standing. "I know you are aware of the house," he began. "The general concept of houses?" Sorry, the house that doesn't exist." He pulled down another chart. It had a picture of a house on it. "Yes," she said, "I know that house. It doesn't exist. It looks like it exists, like it's right there when you look at it, and it's between 2 other identical houses. So it would make more sense for it to be there than not, but it doesn't actually exist," he finished. "Right. It's a weird house. Or it isn't a weird house? It's weird, but not a house. Hard to know how to talk about it." Everyone in town knew about the house that looks like it exists, but doesn't. There was a common dare among scientists to knock on the door and then run away. Carlos himself had once entered the house. He didn't talk much about this. Anytime the topic came up, he would wave it off or try to change the subject. What Nilanjana had learned from his research notes was that its interior was entirely different from that of the common prefab house it seemed to be when one peered through its windows. Seen from the inside, the house contained no furniture and no decorations, except a small black and white photo of a lighthouse. The house was not a house, but an entryway to a desert otherworld, vast and empty. There was a single mountain in that otherworld, and it was completely believable to all who saw it. At the top of the mountain was the lighthouse from the photo. There had been a cold light emanating from all around, though the sun was never visible. Hypothesis. The desert otherworld had been cold and empty and had made Carlos feel lost to the people he loved. Carlos cared more than anything about the people he loved, and so a place with no one and nothing in it had been traumatizing for him. Ever since Carlos's return from the otherworld a few years back, everyone in the lab knew he had been obsessed with the house. And like most obsessions with the truth, this had made the city council nervous. "Your job is being a scientist," the council had told him, via an empty-eyed child messenger who had helpfully lunged out at him from the shower when he had gotten up to pee in the middle of the night. "So look pretty and write papers. Don't go searching around for the truth. You're a scientist, not a snoop." "Man," said Nilanjana, as he told her about the message from the council. "Yes, it was upsetting," said Carlos. And then, of course, I was stuck with an empty-eyed child messenger. And you know how long it takes the city council to come back around and pick them up. We ended up having to give her rides to school for the next 3 weeks. We're going to her 8th grade graduation tomorrow. Oh, cute. Super cute. But I won't let the city council dissuade me from preventing anyone else from being hurt by that other world. They've been trying to stop me.
Well, it looks like we have about 10 minutes for some questions from the audience. There's a microphone right at the center, so and then we'll move on to the book signing. So if anybody has some questions, this is your time.
Get that mic. No, it's fine.
Actually, the podcast question. So,
Yeah, I don't think that mic's actually on.
so my favorite series of episodes are the story of episodes, and they just are. I can't even describe how much they've like helped me through my life. What gave you the idea of not only having a story in this world where we're sort of inserting ourselves and both feeling it and feeling like you're a member of Night Vale, but putting you into the story as well?
A story about you was an experiment I wrote. I went on a beach vacation with my wife, and it rained the entire time, and we got the flu. So I was just inside for a while, and I started writing this story. And we had never had a Night Vale episode that wasn't in the format we usually worked in. So I remember I called the file "A Story About You," and then in parentheses, "An Experiment in Night Vale Storytelling." And then I finished it, and I sent it to Jeffrey, being like, "I don't know. I wrote this thing. Do you think we could use it?"
And it seemed really good.
Yeah. As for I don't know. I don't know where ideas come from. I think a neurologist might have a better idea than I would.
Sometimes you just get excited about just trying something different, and then you try it, and you determine before you ever do anything with it that maybe you determine it doesn't work. But usually, that's the joy of collaboration, is you can pass it to somebody that can tell you if it works or not, to help you with that. And then Sean, you working in theater too, working with new plays. There's so many there's so many safeguards to maybe too many sometimes of reading through a play and having people talk things through. And I feel like a lot of ideas just come from being able to share with other people before you put it out into the world and get some nice feedback on that. But yeah, having something like a different format of a show, and then coming back, I was I got really excited about it too. And then when we put it out there, once you hear Cecil do it, and you realize I could do more of these. This is great.
Thank you.
Thanks. I like everybody just really getting after it with speed. Guys. We're staying on time. It's so good.
Also, feel free to go to that mic and wait. You don't have to wait for it to be empty.
Yeah.
No, it's okay, please.
No. Do it.
So did you guys always plan to have Cecil and Carlos get married? Or was it just hey, everybody likes them being together, should we just make them married?
I mean, from the get-go, I don't know that we even knew that Cecil and Carlos would be a couple necessarily. Because with Night Vale, we never had we didn't really have a plot for years ahead of time. It was never here's going to be the 7-book arc of this story. It really is just this is going to be a podcast, this is going to be a radio show in this fictional town. And so Cecil definitely has this interest in Carlos at the beginning, and Carlos is this outsider, this super handsome kind of I think in our mind when we first made that, it was almost like the 50s B-movie scientist with perfect hair and everything. It's I'm going to save the world sort of thing from this weird sci-fi dystopia. And but Cecil Baldwin, the actor, he put so much into his love of Carlos as we kept having that, and it became this thing of this is really sweet. It's really nice. He's a little bit in the first episode, if you re-listen to it, he's a little bit fearful of him too, and a little bit on edge about this interloper. But yeah, it just becomes a really sweet thing. And so as we built that, we were oh well, this would be really delightful to put them together. And then once you do that, then you find a realistic relationship to write about. You have a real adult couple meeting and dating and kind of even having a moment where they are not even in the same town, like having a long distance relationship for a brief time in the show. Brief, it was like a year, but it was still like, you deal with those things. And so eventually you just, like all the characters in Night Vale, we want them to grow up, to get older, even if they stay the same age. And, but we want them to like have experiences and move on. And I think having them get married just seemed to spoiler alert, but having them get to that point just made a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a big fan of all the Welcome to Night Vale podcasts, Welcome to Night Vale, Alice Isn't Dead, Within the Wires, and the new one about Wim Ferros or whatever.
Yeah, it makes a sound. It's a great one.
It makes a sound, yeah. And what struck me about the podcasts as I was listening to them is how many of the characters are queer, like pretty much all the main characters. And it's really refreshing. I like how not an issue it is in the Welcome to Night Vale universe, how people are just queer and it's just a thing and it's not a big deal and no one talks about it and it's just normal. I was wondering if that was a conscious decision or if it just, sort of happened that you wanted to write these characters and they just happened to be queer, or if like you set out to make a bunch of podcasts where all the main characters would be queer.
I mean, I can't speak for Jeffrey and Within the Wires. I mean, I definitely don't think I went into Alice being like, we have a mission as a podcast network to have our main characters be queer. But it made sense for each of those characters. Especially like Alice. Alice, I knew I wanted that. I mean, partly I built it around Jessica. Before it was Alice Isn't Dead. It's still saved in my computer as Jessica Podcast Project. Like I just knew I wanted to write something for her because I really loved how she performed it. And then it became a thing of there's so many sci-fi mysteries and sci-fi horror that are built almost entirely around white men. And I just wanted to see, can I build an entire sci-fi horror thriller that is built almost entirely around women of color and specifically queer women of color, and just have it be the same level of not commenting on it that you would if you built an entire thing around white men, that it's the same story that it could have been if it was a guy driving around looking for his wife, and that is how some newspapers have reported on that show because they didn't read the thing too closely. Looking for his wife. But yeah, it was just sort of a thing of like, sometimes the question becomes, if you can do this thing, why wouldn't you? And so that was a lot of it for me, was if I can build it around that, if I have that choice, then it just seemed like, why wouldn't I? I don't know. I don't have a very coherent philosophy on that. I apologize.
No, that's a pretty coherent philosophy.
Thank you.
So first of all, I want to thank you again for coming to Iowa City, the Coralville area. Big fans here. We really appreciate it.
It's the second time I've been here this year.
Yeah,
First time was on my birthday.
I missed the first one. Sad. So I'm not a really, really big fan. I used to be in the early years of the early moments of the podcast, episodes like that. But a big question that comes in a lot of the fan communities I've noticed, like on Reddit and such, is a coherent timeline. And my question is, I think it's episode 69 or so, when Cecil goes on vacation, when you put a big block basically saying that there may be one or more timelines to Night Vale. And then it also references an earlier part of the podcast with Meat Crown King and such. So do you ever think you're going to either publish some sort of infographic or anything that kind of explains what actually happened in the Cold War, for example, to Night Vale and all that stuff with the splits? Because almost everyone I talk to about it is just like, well, this happened here, but Lee Marvin's still 30, but then this happened, but then Gulgorsk and all this stuff. And so it's a big question. And yeah. So.
Like infographic, no. Timeline, no. Like explanations, no. Like we've never been that interested in like writing. We've never really been that interested in answers to like some of the big questions. I think what makes Night Vale really charming is to us is like all of the oddness, all of the absurdity that is really mundane in Night Vale, and all of the mundane things that are truly absurd. And so there's a lot of weird stuff about Night Vale, and there's a lot of these weird conspiracies there that I think, as in real life, the people of Night Vale may never know the answers to, and we may not either. But some of those things are stuff that we've talked about before. Like we still touch on the Nulagorsk stuff and the Cold War and Huntakar and things. And there's some explanations off and on about different moments and different characters. Lee Marvin is a thing. Lee Marvin being 30. All the time is a really fascinating thing that I think maybe we might get to someday.
I mean, specifically, it's always his birthday when he's turning 30.
It's always his birthday.
Every single day.
Every single day, Lee Marvin is turning 30. And but yeah, I think there's certain things that we'll get to in time, but it is ultimately like it's ultimately a radio show in a town not unlike our own, even though what's absurd there is not the same thing that's absurd here.
Okay, so yeah, again, I just wanted to thank you for coming to Iowa City. It was really great to have
Absolutely,
you.
thank you
you so much.
I kind of wanted to ask more of like, I guess, a writing question.
Sure, I love writing questions. Hate writing, love writing questions.
And like this might be kind of like sort of a stereotypical like this question's always asked, but like do you ever get kind of like, I guess, self-conscious about the stuff that you like put out into the world, and like how do you kind of handle the criticism that you might get from it? Or like if there's something that like you're really proud of and then someone, or like you kind of notice negative feedback about it. Like I was kind of wondering like how you as a creative person, like whether or not you're self-conscious about the stuff that you put out, and like what or how you handle like the criticisms against like this thing that you're obviously super proud of and super excited about doing.
I mean, part of it you handle it by feeling bad. I guarantee you that J.K. Rowling and Stephen King, if they see a shitty review of their book, they feel bad about it. There's just not a way around that. You feel bad when you see people saying bad things about your writing. But I think part of it is, we were talking about the neo-futurists. We both came out of that. And I learned so much about art and about being an artist and being an artist in the world from the neo-futurists. And a lot of what I learned is the show they do is 30 short plays in 60 minutes. And it's not improv, they write those. But every week they tear out anywhere between 2 and 12 of those 30 plays, tear them out and write new ones. And they never perform those ones that they took out ever again. And the main thing I learned about that was just how disposable art can be, and that's wonderful. Having a philosophy that your art is disposable is one of the most freeing things as an artist. It really puts you into this thing where you are constantly pitching forward. I think it completely changed my philosophy on art from the one that I think generally is what we have in the society, where art is a thing that is preserved and we look at the classical forms and we keep going back to the classics. And it's more about art is something that should be local, it should be now, it should be about your life and what's happening now in your world and about your community, and you should just keep making it. And that was really helpful with Night Vale, because it's hard to worry about whether the thing you made 6 months ago was good or not, because who cares? You're writing 3 other things now. You got to just you should worry about whether it's good while you're working on it, and then the moment you put it out, it's done, and who cares about it? Because the thing you should be worrying about is what you're writing next. But also, you'll still feel bad.
Yeah. That was a really good question. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So first off, happy birthday, Lee Marvin.
Yeah, happy
Just putting
30th
that out there.
birthday.
Happy 30th.
Yeah.
Second off, this became kind of a tradition with one of my friends from college. We get a whole lot of writers in the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids area, and it's wonderful. Love having them. But the tradition I'm carrying on from her is to ask, what are your favorite punctuation marks? Just so you know, Juno Diaz's is a comma.
This is a comma?
Yeah.
Mine is. I actually have an answer. That mine is definitely the M dash. I really like the M dash a lot. Thank you, M dash fans. Yeah, I just like the offset middle of the sentence side thought. I like them. I think they're just nicer looking than parentheses. They stand out better. They seem more of like a true like insertion. Just geometrically, I think they're stronger of a choice, and just visually, they look like an interruption in a sentence.
I like a period. They're snappy.
And I think this will be our last question.
Hi, I had a question about like the use of like second person in some of your episodes, like a story about you or like referring to like the faceless woman. There's like just references of using you as when you're putting the reader directly into the episode. And I wanted to know if that was like, as people are saying, like a conscious choice or if not, like then looking back on it, what made you choose to do that, do you think?
I mean, I would say everything in writing is a conscious choice in a way. Like, I'm not a believer in the Stephen King-esque, your main character should lead you through the story. I think the writer's in charge, and I think the writer makes the decisions and is responsible for what happens in the thing. A lot of that happens in editing. You know, when you're writing, you just kind of put a bunch of stuff up, and then you see what looks good. And so a lot of it is in the curating when you go back through that rough draft. I think probably it comes a bit out of the downtown New York theater we do, where there's a lot of addressing the fact that you're in a room with people. And so you do a lot of getting up close to people and talking to them as human being to human being. Yeah, yes, I'm a performer, but in this moment, we're also two people in a room, and I'm going to acknowledge that and talk to you. And so kind of bringing that into audio, and this is something Jeffrey is exploring even more within The Wires, but this thing of you're a human being listening to this thing I made, and I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge you. Like, you are part of this. You are the part that receives and turns this into images in your head. And it's, I think, better for both of us if I don't pretend you're not there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's so important in theater to do that. And podcasting is a very intimate art form. Like it is, most people listen through earbuds. Those voices are literally inside your ears, and they are. And radio, by its very nature, is it's warm, it's intimate. It is a single voice talking to you. And there's so many podcasts that we were talking recently about. Like, there's a way of like our favorite podcasts are the ones that we elevate to podcast I listen to go to sleep. Like the podcast that knocks you out cold, you know, that you're like, I'm so soothed by these voices or whatever. Like, I think recently for Joseph, my brother and me made that jump, which is very exciting for them. We should tell them, let them know.
Let them know they've been elevated to the thing I fall asleep
to. You know, and I think that, so playing with that second person became a neat way to sort of like put it back on the listener, especially for something like when we wrote the Faceless Old Woman episode. It becomes a new way of doing horror. Like, it really is, like, Mara's voice is really upsetting. And you get that like weird raspy pseudo whisper in your ear, saying all these like very nice but like aggressively nice things, but then all of the other horrible stuff she's been doing in the background, like that sort of thing is really just, it seemed natural to do it that way.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I want to say thank you to Joseph and Jeffrey for
Thanks so
being
much, Sean.
here.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Yeah, let's give a round of applause for that.